Commander Jathic of the Galactic Defense Coalition stood before the assembled War Council, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the cold blue light of the chamber. For 3 cycles, he had studied humanity's military capabilities, their tactical innovations, their seemingly impossible victories against superior forces. But one question haunted him above all others. How do you train your warriors? He asked the human liaison, Colonel Sarah Chen, who sat calmly across the obsidian table. The council chamber fell silent. 17 species, each representing the finest military minds in known space, leaned forward in anticipation. Humans had emerged from their small corner of the galaxy only 50 standard years ago, yet their soldiers possessed something inexplicable: an adaptability, a creative thinking, a resilience that defied conventional training methodologies. Colonel Chen smiled, a gesture that still unnerved some of the assembled delegates. You want to see how we train our warriors? Yes. Jathic's voice resonated through his translator implant. Your soldiers improvise under impossible circumstances. They lead without orders. They sacrifice themselves for strangers. This is not standard military conditioning. We must understand your methods. The Vrexian ambassador, a being of pure energy contained within a magnetic field, pulsed with agreement. Our elite forces train for 20 cycles before deployment. Yours are combat-ready in 2. The mathematics are impossible. Chen's smile widened. You're asking the wrong question, Commander. You want to know how we train our warriors, but what you should ask is, how do we train our children? Confusion rippled through the chamber. The insectoid delegate from Chiron Prime clicked her mandibles in a pattern that translated to bewilderment. I don't understand, Jathic admitted. Let me show you, Chen said, activating a holographic display in the chamber's center. The first image materialized: a human child, no more than 3 standard years old, falling from a primitive climbing structure. The delegates watched in horror as the child hit the ground. But instead of adult intervention, the recording showed parents watching from a distance. The child cried, stood up, and climbed again. Barbaric, whispered the Lumerian observer, whose species kept their young in protective stasis chambers for the first decade of life. Chen continued, We call it falling down. It's the first lesson. The next footage showed human children engaged in what appeared to be ritualized combat: wrestling, chasing, play fighting with improvised weapons. The Vrexian ambassador dimmed with distress. They're hurting each other. They're learning, Chen corrected. Learning about consequences, about physics, about their own limitations and how to exceed them. The images continued. Human children navigating obstacle courses with no clear solution. Children building structures that collapsed, teaching them engineering through failure. Children mediating their own disputes without adult interference, developing diplomacy and conflict resolution. Then came footage that made even Jathic's hardened military consciousness recoil. Human children, barely into adolescence, performing what humans called sports, throwing themselves into physical contact, risking injury for arbitrary objectives, competing with intensity that seemed more appropriate for survival situations than recreation. This is your training? The Chiron delegate asked, her voice modulated with disbelief. You injure your young for games? We teach them that pain is temporary, Chen explained. That failure is a teacher. That rules exist, but creativity can transcend them. Every sport has constraints, but within those constraints, infinite solutions exist. The hologram shifted to something that struck deeper. A human child, perhaps 10 years old, at something called a science fair, presenting a project that had clearly failed. The child's facial expressions showed disappointment, but the child stood before judges, explaining what went wrong, what was learned, what would be tried differently next time. You celebrate their failures? Jathic asked, genuinely confused. We celebrate their attempts, Chen replied. We teach them that trying and failing is more valuable than never trying at all. But it was the final sequence of footage that broke something in the assembled warriors. A human family, gathered around a table. A child, no more than 8 years old, speaking about something troubling them at their educational facility. The parents listened, asked questions, but didn't solve the problem. They offered perspectives, shared their own stories of similar struggles, provided emotional support, but ultimately left the solution to the child. The camera captured the child's face processing this, thinking, planning, developing agency. You give them autonomy before they're ready, the Lumerian said, but there was less certainty in the observation now. We give them autonomy so they'll be ready, Chen countered. Every species here trains warriors by breaking them down and rebuilding them into soldiers. We build humans by never breaking them at all. Every challenge they face as children, every scraped knee, every lost game, every failed experiment, every conflict with peers, these are the training simulations. We don't create soldiers. We create adaptable, resilient, creative problem solvers who, if necessary, can become soldiers. The hologram showed one last image, a human child, perhaps 5 years old, approaching another child who sat alone. The first child offered something, a toy, a gesture of inclusion. No adult had instructed this. The child had simply recognized another's isolation and acted to remedy it. Jathic felt his combat-hardened neural pathways overwhelmed by something he had no designation for. His translator implant struggled to classify it. The closest approximation it could provide was a human word, bittersweet. You train them to care, he said softly, understanding flooding through him, not just to obey, not just to fight. You train them to care about each other, about strangers, about abstract concepts like justice and mercy, and you do it through pain and failure and autonomy. Around the chamber, similar realizations were occurring. The Vrexian ambassador brightened with comprehension. The Chiron delegate's mandibles stilled in contemplation. Several of the assembled warriors, beings who had seen countless battles across multiple systems, displayed their species' equivalent of tears. They had asked how humans trained warriors. They had learned something far more profound, how humans trained humans. And in that understanding lay the reason humanity, despite being younger and smaller and less technologically advanced than nearly every other species in the coalition, had become indispensable to it. Because when the galaxy needed someone to face impossible odds, to improvise under pressure, to sacrifice for strangers, to find creative solutions where none seemed to exist, humanity didn't need to train special soldiers. For those tasks, they had been training every single human child for exactly that purpose since the species first learned to walk. Colonel Chen closed the holographic display. Any other questions, Commander? Jathic looked at the human liaison with newfound respect, and perhaps something approaching awe. Just one, he said. How did your species survive long enough to reach the stars? Chen's smile returned, warm and genuine. The same way we do everything else, Commander. We fell down. We got back up. And we kept climbing. The end.